Basically, if anyone has a name that they want to give the Rebbe for a blessing, for something, or for shleim if someone's ill, you can come forward to the Rebbe because he'll write down the names inside of his book. So the Rebbe can do that now. If anybody wants to meet the Rebbe privately for a 15, 20-minute appointment, so we're having appointments all day, Sunday, but it's on the other side of town by Beth Jacob. But it's not such a far drive, I just did it. So you're welcome to come. So you can make an appointment with me. I have slots open. So you can come over to me at any time, and I can give you an appointment. If you go to Rebbe later today, afternoon or evening, you let me know. But again, very quickly, if you have just a name to give the Rebbe, or for a blessing for yourself or for someone you know, so you can come over to the Rebbe.
Also, I'd like the women to come first, if the men don't mind.
Ladies first.
And secondly, I forgot to mention that we do have a unique type of lecture that we give on these forums. You see the video, the text on the screen, and it's you see the Hebrew translation as well on the Gemara. For example, we have Gemara, we have Rambam, we have Hasidic Sforim, we have some non-Hasidic Sforim, and you can hear it. So there are cards here that if anybody wants to look it up, they're able to find it by looking up Boston video text. There are no other such lectures that I know of that are as widespread. And you can learn Talmud Bavli, Yerushalmi, etc. So please.
Maybe want to speak about the work that he's done for clothing?
Yes and no. I want to make you aware that my father, the Bostoner Rebbe Zatzal, was the first medical referral rabbi in the United States. He perfected the method, besides being the first Rebbe who actually reached out to collegiates and young people before there was a Torah, before there was Ner Mayo. We're talking back in the 60s. Ner Lelev, sorry. Ner Lelev, many other organizations, good organizations, before they were killing them in other cities. And in the medical referral, not only did we supply medical referral, but we also supplied housing. Israeli embassy would send us people from Israel who came. We tried to assist them in negotiating with the hospitals as far as prices for operations. That's no longer possible because of different situations, unless it's research. But my wife, make sure you be well, was very instrumental in leading this. I was sort of like just the side person. She was the person who was really involved with doctors and getting to the people and personally making that connection. It's very different, by the way, just to let you know. When you visit somebody at the hospital, it makes a big difference because when the doctors and the nurses see that there's attention being given to a patient, they are more cognizant of their obligations. When the patient is left alone, there's nobody seeking them out, then they become lax. We're all human, and I'm not faulting them. We're all human. But when they see people, and this was done, my father established it. When I left for Israel, basically, my father, my younger brother, continued it, and it's still going. And we were hoping that people will stop being sick, but that hasn't happened yet either. But there are so many new things. And one time, people used to have to be held in Boston for 6 months for the period of today. You have an appointment, you come down for a test, you come back a few weeks later for the operation, you spend 3 or 4 days there, and then you're out. It's a whole different procedure, a whole different way. I'll tell you just one story about that. Before heart transplants were as prevalent as they are today, there was a 3-day-old infant that was born and needed a heart, not a transplant, a heart operation, because there was a hole between the different chambers of the heart, and they wanted to do it in Israel. Prime Minister Bagel was still Prime Minister. It was in the 70s, and there was a VAD, or like they're going to have for Obamacare. There was an overall board to see whether you can have such an operation, or if it can be done in Israel, it wasn't going to be done elsewhere. And they found a doctor who had done 3 such operations, and it was decided they were not going to send the child to America because the doctor had done 3 operations. And someone was close to Bagel. He came to me and said, yeah, the doctor did 3, he was unsuccessful in all 3. So Bagel overruled the committee, and they sent the child to Boston, and the child was operated on, and Dr. Castaneda did it, and is doing quite well till today, Baruch Hashem. Children and grandchildren. That's the answer. My father did many, many innovative things. He brought, in a sense, Hasidus into, if you say what Hasidic group comes from America, so it's not Ger, it's not Belz, it's not Chabad. It is Boston. It's true Chabad had a great effect on America, but the source of being an American-related Hasidus, dealing from a certain vantage point with young people, is something people told me. I know a person who told me they went with my father to Harvard, but my father had perfect English. There's only one problem with it. My father never went to Harvard. But other than that, it was very good. I wasn't going to contradict him because he remembered it clearly. Anyway, a pleasure being here. And if you want to come over about referral, if anyone, please let me know. I'll add it. If you want to make this form for the shul, please.
Thank you very
The back it says, just to make sure you remember, on the back page,
Back cover.
it says this is a back cover. It says, see that on the bottom? It says this is a project of the Bostoner Rebbe. So if you have to remember the name Boston. Let me get back starting incorporating last week's parsha with this week's parsha, and that is that we have in this week's parsha we find it's Chai Sarah. Avram's coming to bury his wife, and he's been promised Eretz Yisrael. Last week, a few parshas that we've read, portions that we've read, all tell us that God promised the land to Israel. Just to give you a little bit of a background to that, in the 30s, there was a movement by even one of the great Hasidic leaders, the Bostoner Rebbe. He wanted to move to Israel. He actually moved without aliyah. There was no formal way of moving, but he moved there, lock, stock, and barrel. He kept only one day when he was there. And then they sat a Besdin, a court, rabbinical court in Europe, and they said that he cannot leave his community and he had to come back. And he urged people to come to Israel. When he was there, he was brought before the High Commissioner. At that time, England was holding Palestine on behalf of the Jewish people because the United Nations had given them the obligation after World War I, the League of Nations had given them the obligation. They had given them the obligation of holding Israel, Palestine. And they had promised in the Balfour Declaration that they were going to make a Jewish state there. And first Jordan was given away completely. And then after World War, and then they didn't want to take Jews from Israel to fight in World War II. They were very hesitant. They finally, the British had no choice. They made a Jewish brigade toward the end of World War II. And that Jewish brigade actually was the
Seeds.
You're thinking of, right, your seeds is also Yarin. Yarin means the core of the armored corps. It was the core of the army. In fact, there were 5,000 American soldiers who fought for Israel in the war of what they called independence. I call it the war of survival because we didn't go to war. We did not go to war. We were attacked. There was one basic desire was to throw us into the ocean. And I heard from former president, ex-president Asa Weitzman, who was running for the position, called some rabbis together. He said if we had had 5,000 more soldiers from America, there wouldn't be the question of the West Bank or not. They would have conquered, they would have taken the West Bank as well at that time. And just like India, all the Muslims immigrated north to, most of the Muslims immigrated north to Pakistan, and all the non-Muslims, for sure, moved out of Pakistan into India. There would have been that type of a movement at that point in time. And he was there, and he was brought before the High Commissioner. Now, the High Commissioner spoke English, he didn't speak Yiddish or Hebrew. And the Kehilla Rebbe did not speak English. But he had a son who knew English, he was spoken, although not publicly. And he was brought there by a translator. And the translator introduced him to the High Commissioner. This is the Kehilla Rebbe, and the other one, the Rebbe, this is the High Commissioner. High Commissioner said, tell the Kehilla Rebbe, I greet him and thank him for coming to Palestine, as it was then. It was called. I don't know if you're stamp collectors, there were stamps you can still find from that period of time. And the Kehilla Rebbe said as well, it's a pleasure meeting the High Commissioner. The High Commissioner asked, he spoke about different things, and he said to him, what does he think about the Balfour Declaration? So he said it over in Yiddish, I'll say in Hebrew, Chazal, Sheyeh, Medina, Yehudim. And he answered Mechtesa. Mechtesa is actually taken from the Talmud, it's Aramaic. Jewish language is a mixture of your local language with either Hebrew or Aramaic. And sometimes the words change completely. Like for today, if somebody says to invest in Apple, for example, I don't know if it's a good investment. If it's a good investment, the other person will say, Chaval al Azman, which literally translated would mean it's a waste of time. But in Israel, Chaval al Azman means it's so obvious, you should do it. So how does it go from one meaning to the other changes? So the language changes. Doesn't make any sense to me, so but that's what they say. Chaval al Azman means sure, even though it translated would be it's a waste of time.
What it means is a waste of time to even talk about it, it's so obvious that you're saying it.
I understand, but reverses around, right? It takes it totally out of it's a simple text. Mechtesa in the Gemara means, how do you know that? Where do you know that? Yiddish Mechtesa is difficult to explain. Mechtesa doesn't mean weird. It's sort of a statement like, so he didn't know how to translate it. But he knew that the High Commissioner didn't know Yiddish anyway. So he said, the rabbi says it's wonderful. That's how you can translate when the other person doesn't have someone to corroborate whether you're doing something else. When they left, he asked the Rebbe, what did the Rebbe mean when he said Mechtesa? What did he mean? So he says, I'll tell you what I meant. Mechtesa means, okay, not okay, I'll accept that. Accept that. It said as follows, God promised Israel to Abraham. He promised Israel to Jacob. Isaac. He promised Israel to Jacob. He promised Israel to Moses, who gave it to the generation of that received the Torah, the generation that went into Israel. The English also want to agree. Okay, we'll accept it. They want to put their signature on the document after God did so. We'll let them do that. We won't go against them. Why do I mention it? Because Abraham was given Israel, the land. In fact, you go to Stone, technically God destroyed a paradise within the area of Israel, which became desolate. In a sense, he promises Abraham, look at this wonderful building that you're going to get, and then he takes and burns down a certain portion of it. Huh? So, how did he do that? Well, Abraham didn't ask questions. He came to purchase the land in Hebron, and the Gemara tells us that there are 3 areas which are not in dispute. Everyone agrees it belongs to the Jewish people. 3 areas. The Gemara says there are 3 areas that no one disputes it because we bought it, we purchased it. What are those 3 areas? Hebron, the Temple Mount, and Shechem, where Yosef is buried. Now, Rachel, it doesn't mention there. Hebron is Ma'at HaMachpelah. It wasn't only the cave, it's all around it, everything that was around it. So that's Hebron. I'm sorry if I wasn't clear about that. And if you say we're the hot spots in Israel, so of course the Temple Mount is not a hot spot. Neither is Ma'at HaMachpelah or Kiryat Arba, and nor is Shem. They only burn down every second year. They burn the tomb of Joseph, which is found there. Every couple of years it's burned down. Of course, there's religious freedom for all, except for Jewish people, it seems. Anyway, Abraham has to buy this piece of land. And why did he have to buy it if God gave it to him? Because he went to the Medrash, the tomb of the patriarchs is located near the entrance to Gan Eden, to heaven, whatever that means. I have no clue to that either. But there's an entranceway there. They don't allow anybody to go down below. I don't know if you know, they've never gone into the tomb of the patriarchs to see what is below it. And he pays for it, and the posuk says, "Vayokam Hasoda Hamora Shaboy," that the land was acquired and the cave within it was acquired to Abraham, La'einei b'nei Ches, to the eyes of the children of Ches. The Hittites, I guess they call them, right? Sure. And it's an interesting language. La'einei b'nei Ches. What do you mean La'einei b'nei Ches? He paid for it. Right, made it public. He did it publicly so everybody should see it belongs to him. I'm going to a wedding today here. You know, since I'm going to tie the two together. At a wedding, the man gives the wife a ring, and he says, "All right, you are hereby betrothed to me with this ring." And if she accepts it, then she's fortunate, first of all, and secondly, she's betrothed to him, and the marriage has begun. It's completed with the chuppah. We won't go into all those details. Today, everyone goes to the local store and buys a ring. Years ago, there weren't that many local stores. There were small towns where there were no stores. So you travel to the big town, you bought yourself a ring. It has to belong to the groom. It has to be his. Sometimes the parents want to buy it for them. And if they don't give it, excuse me. And sometimes the parents want to give it. They can give it if the groom actually does an acquisition. If he doesn't acquire it, then the marriage is invalid. It's invalid. So there's a story even of a woman, because the husband has to give his, God forbid if there's a divorce, the husband has to give his wife a divorce. And he's the one who has the control at that point. And sometimes they misuse it. And a woman came complaining her husband didn't want to give her a divorce. And the process goes on for half a year. One time they came, thank you. At the end of the year, half a year, she says, "You know, that my husband is so stingy. He's so stingy that at our wedding, he didn't even buy a ring. You know what he did? He asked his father to give him this ring. And he used that ring. Then he took it back and gave it back to his father. I said, is that so?
Mhm.
And he said,
Yeah.
yes.
They're not married.
So, he says, well, forget it, you're not married. You're not married, you don't need a divorce. So, you see how important owning that ring is. So there was a wedding ceremony, and the fellow must have dropped it somewhere. There's a story about Helm. The fellow was searching for something under the only lamppost that there was in Helm. At night, he was searching for something. So somebody asked him, what are you looking for? He says, this and this. He says, I'll help you. And he's looking, he says, it's not here. Why? Where did you lose it? How did you lose it? He says, I lost it about a block away. She says, why are you looking here? He says, because there's a light over here. There's a light over here. So at a wedding, he lost it. He lost it, and he didn't have a ring. Well, there are good people, and there was a woman there who took off her ring and gave it to the chassid to use, because there was no store to run to get a ring. Now, technically, you would say, that's wonderful. Halachically, it's a bit of a problem. Her husband was not there. If her husband doesn't agree to it, then she can't give it away. And she can't give it away. So, again, I'm just pointing out that the ring is what acquires the wife. Where do you learn it from? How do you know that you acquire a wife with a ring? There's no place that they show a ring illustrated in the Torah, and there's no place where it says specifically you go through the procedure of marriage by giving your wife a ring. The Gemara in Kedushin says, where do you learn it from? You learn it from the same way Abraham acquired the land. The word acquired is found by marriage. A man acquires a wife, and therefore you know that money does work. There are three ways to acquire a wife. We won't go into all the different ways, and the way that's used is with a ring, and you learn it from Ephraim. So from a Hasidic perspective, I view it as follows. It's very funny. This ring that the husband gives his wife, ultimately, she can't give it to anyone. So what is she receiving? What is she receiving? And I say, we know that there's a concept that in heaven, God decrees who shall marry who. Who shall marry whom? And if we're fortunate, that's what takes place the very first time we get married. And therefore would seem predetermined. Predetermined. And if that's the case, why do we have to have the whole ceremony? Husband and wife, it's automatic. You should know that holy matrimony in the church, this was I heard from a convert. I was never Episcopalian myself. But he told me that till 1200 the church never conducted wedding ceremonies. It was considered too materialistic, too physical, not having anything to do with spirituality. So that was in the 1200s. I accept what he told me, although I haven't done research on it. And Jews always had holy matrimony, Kedushin. It's called sanctification. When you marry, you spiritually uplift yourself. And the question is, if she's not receiving it, and why can't they live together like they did before? And it's automatic. This husband and wife are a husband and wife. So the answer is, if as an example, is the field of Hebron. The Hebron belonged to Abraham, yet he purchased it. Why did he have to purchase it? Did he believe God gave it to him? Yes. Usually, if you're walking down the street and somebody says to you, I want to buy your jacket, you say, well, you know, it's a nice jacket. And they ask you where I got it. I'd like to have it. Well, I can tell you where to buy it. No, I'd like to have it right now.
Does the Rebbe know the story of our shul or one of our founders?
I don't know. Go ahead.
Mrs. Joel, Lynette Joel, designs beautiful clothing. She's an artist. and actually lived in Boston in the
What's
first
the last
years of
name?
her marriage.
Joel.
Joel, huh?
And she's probably wearing one of her designs actually right now. And she would wear some of her interesting artistic designs, and actually she would get stopped on the street, and it would happen repeatedly. Then somebody would say, "I have to have that jacket."
No.
She's like, "Okay, I'll go back to my studio. I can make it for you." She says, "No, I want that jacket, and I want it now." And she actually sold the jacket off her back.
Okay, okay, but if you don't want to, you don't have anything underneath the jacket.
But then you have to make
So-
sure that the husband has a
If the
big
fella,
trench
if the
coat
person
towards
wants
the
it,
end.
he takes out a gun. He says, "You either give me the jacket or I'll take it. Please take it off before I shoot you," I guess. In any case, my room jacket. So you sell it. Why did Avram pay for something that belonged to him? It belonged to him. And the answer I give is because Laini B'nai Chez, because the world had to know about it. It had to be seen by the world. Marriage too has that concept that even though the betrothal takes place before, the idea is that people have to know about it. How does it become known? Through the betrothal, through the giving of the ring, through the ceremony. That purpose is that what God gives us, we should make known to the world that this is the case. And that's why the two are equated. So I think that's a concept that we can all comprehend and understand. And that's the connection of there are three things in Hasidic thought that are always present, and nobody contradicted me so far. Which one, it's not my thought, it's the Tzaddik HaKoyim, who says there's always person, place, and time. We all happen to be here at this place, at this moment in time, and we are each individuals, the persons who are there. So the person would be the marriage. Laws regarding marriage are between people. Place would be the land of Israel, and that belongs to the Jewish people. Time means that you have to implement it at a certain point, continue it. I heard something from someone recently who told me that on last week's portion, a very wonderful insight. You know, Rashi says that when the Malachim asked, "Where is Sarah?" they knew where she was. But they said it to endear her to her husband. Now mind you, how old was Sarah? 90. How old was Avram? 99. What is... They've lived together for 90 years, 80 years. You have to endear yourself to your wife. You have to have somebody know. At times we forget. We become complacent. We presume it's automatic. We know each other so well that the slightest inflection, sound, you know if your wife's upset with you or she isn't upset with you, or vice versa. The husband comes home tired from work and he says something, presuming that I'm just letting off steam. I couldn't tell my boss to go jump in the lake, so I have to be able to leave it off. But the wife is not necessarily the one who has to receive it, or vice versa. If the wife has her hands full with the children all day, and the husband doesn't know about it, what happened, or what took place, and he comes home, and she's not in the mood. This is something we have to think about throughout our life. And with that, I will end the discussion and ask if there are any questions about anything that you might perhaps want me to answer. Yes?
So I
What's your
did
name,
not.
sir? Please.
I'm sorry.
Please state your name.
Oh, Matt Marks.
Right.
Okay, so I did not Wikipedia or Google
Bostoner Rebbe.
Bostoner Rebbe. Well, I did, but I didn't go through the hashgacha of what a Bostoner believes, and I've been confused about Hasidism. There's like, I don't know, 15, 20 different sects of Hasidism. I don't know how many there are.
How many Sephardic sects are there?
I don't know.
Similar.
Okay,
How
so
many
I
Ashkenazic sects are there?
don't know.
Not so many.
So
Like in your Siddur, if you notice, in the Siddur of Ashkenaz, it says at the top, some communities say this right after Shemona Esrei. You
Right.
say it? No. So you're a different sect, you're a different group.
so my question.
But they're all the same. But go ahead.
My question is just simplistically, if you had to kind of do your mission statement for us, what does a Bostoner Hasidic believe that Litvish Ashkenaz, I guess is what we would call ourselves, doesn't believe? What differentiates?
I wouldn't say they don't believe. First, I'm a descendant of the Baal Shem Tov who established Hasidus, and he said that Hasidim didn't change anything. The question is emphasis. The question is what you emphasize. In the Litvish world today, it's interesting, I pointed this out to many people, the largest community that survived the war was the Hungarian community. And their yeshiva system of education was different than anything we have today. They were unable to urbanize their concept of study of teaching children. In Hungary, if a child at 13 was very bright, he would jump into, like we have it here at times, they jump into university, straight from 8th grade to elementary school. This is the way it worked on a natural form. You went to a local place until that place was unable to teach you anything else, and you went to the next place. It was unable to be transmitted here. Here we live on a conveyor belt system in education. We've gotten to the point, thank God, I'm saying that very facetiously, that we have remedial reading in college. It sounds a bit ludicrous, but that's what we have. They get all the way, because you're just going up the conveyor belt. You go first grade, 5th grade, 8th grade, 12th grade, now you're in college. Soon they'll find there's some people running, the university will be free for everybody. We may have to teach them the ABC, we get remedial reading. But, so we emphasize more. If you had to, for a moment, just think about it, what does the Litvish world emphasize as the measuring stick for religiosity?
Talmud.
Learning.
Talmud.
Study. That's the only criteria. Hasidus gives other criteria as well. Gives other criteria. Rabbi Akiva Eger, for those who are familiar, was one of the greatest scholars in the world. He had a son-in-law called Chassam Sofer. And the Chassam Sofer, in the second marriage from which all his descendants was a son-in-law of Rabbi Akiva Eger. And if you speak to any of the descendants of the two of them, you ask them, who are you descended from? They will say, we're from the Chassam Sofer. Wait a second, they had another grandfather who was quite, in the Talmudic world, may even be on a higher level than the Chassam Sofer. Why then don't they mention that the grandfather was Rabbi Akiva Eger? The answer that I give is because Rabbi Akiva Eger focused only on one thing, on Talmud. And he was brilliant, and he is the classic source for many, many questions, many explanations in the Talmud. That Chassam Sofer was an all-around person. He wrote on Talmud. He was a rabbi who answered questions, theological questions that came up. He was someone who wrote on the Bible, like Shamshon Raphael Hirsch wrote on the Bible. So anyone at any level of Judaism could connect to that Chassam Sofer because, oh yeah, I saw something about Chassam Sofer. To know something from Rabbi Akiva Eger, you have to be a very learned person. And therefore, they mentioned that Chassam Sofer because that was across the board. I have to say, Chassidus works in the same way. Chassidus works in the sense It's across the board. It's across the board. For example, I'm very upset in Israel. There are people who want to set aside schools exclusively, not just for geniuses, but only for people whose parents are studying Torah. This took place, I don't know if you know, I said that the rabbi, his wife, used to by Rabbi Reuben in Har Nov. Many years ago, there was a movement like that in Har Nov to have only children of people who are studying in Kollel and not working. And Rabbi Reuben was a very bright person, turned to the group that came to him. He said, oh, if you're working, you can't send your children there? No. He said, so what do? I teach in a grade school. Oh, okay, so you're working, your children can't go there. And next, what are you doing? He is Rosh Yeshiva in a different school. Oh, you're also getting paid for your job, right? So you can't send your children there. And he went around the whole group. So the category of what's called work, there's almost nothing. And the Hasidic movement, the idea is that one that my father used to stay over and prove it from a fingerprint. At that time, everyone has a different fingerprint. Every Jew sitting here has a purpose in life that I don't have. And you have to fulfill that potential. It doesn't mean you don't learn. Learning, the Hasidic movement never disparaged any Torah giant. Even when the Gaon came out against the Hasidic movement, they never disparaged it. Because learning is important to us. And the Sfas Emes, if you've heard the name, he became Rebbe at 18. Until he passed away at a young age of 56, he was looked at and mocked as being an 80-year-old who took a position. He got a position because his father was a Rebbe. And everybody says, oh, his father's a Rebbe, then he's obviously just taking over something which he has no qualifications for. When he passed away, he left writings. The one who knew about it, Reb Chaim Brisker, used to have contact with him. In fact, when the Al Torah on Torah, when the Sfas Emes came out, there was a question of whether they should do editing to make it more comprehensible to the people. It's written in a funny fashion. It's written in a way that, for example, 17 people can read the same paragraph and see 17 different interpretations. And he said, let me look for it for 24 hours. And he gave it back and he said, don't touch it. Just leave it the way it is. So Hasidic, there's also a posuk that you may have learned, Sur me'ra v'asei tov. Leave evil and do good. So you may ask only between the Litvische and the Hasidic movement, but actually the first people who studied Musar, and for a half hour a day, were instructed to do so, were the Hasidim. But about 100 years before Bisol Salanto. You can see it in the Tzavo, the will of the Rav Noam Elimelech. At that time, there weren't Hasidic Svarim. As you should learn Chovos Halvos, you should learn Reishis Chochma. These are all dealing with ethics. But the emphasis is, the posuk seems to go in order: Sumeiro, leave evil, Asei Toiv, and do good. So what's the first step? Leave evil, and then Asei Toiv. Hasidim said, we're living in a different time. Asei Toiv, do the good. Worry about getting rid of the evil afterwards. Do the evil, do the good first. Don't continue the evil, but don't be preoccupied with what I did or what I should have done, could have been. I hope that answers the question to some extent. It's not a perfect answer. Yes?
I have a question. What are your thoughts about what's happening now and the general talk is that Mashiach is on his way and all that's going on in
You're asking me personally, Mashiach's always on his way. He's been on his way a long time. And the question is, what's impeding him? What the impediments are? The world is divided into three categories. The first 2,000 years, or 6,000 years, anybody's around 240 years from now, will find that to be the case. And if you find it differently, please tell me right now. That's what we believe. 2,000 years of desolation, There was no Torah, 2,000 years of Torah, from approximately when Abraham came into existence, and 2,000 years of Messianic era, meaning it's possible for Mashiach to come. There are signs. They would seem to be, there are good signs, there are some bad signs. But you're not supposed to delve into it. The Rambam in his 13 principles, and I work on the Rambam, and I'm giving this to the synagogue. It's 2 volumes, it has an English translation. One is on Yom Kippur. And many people read this through on one Yom Kippur, and you know the entire service that the Kohen Gadol did in the Beis HaMikdash, the temple, and you can comprehend what he was doing. But you asked me again, please, my mind, I left the subject matter, you asked me. Huh?
About the Mashiach.
Oh, about Mashiach coming, that we can hasten it by belief. So the Rambam says in the 13th Ikrim, Ani Mamim Emunah Sholemo, V'viyas Hara Mashiach. I believe God, Mashiach is coming. You have to believe Mashiach is coming when? Right now. We heard stories about the Chavetz Chaim, we heard stories of other great people who had a briefcase ready, because Mashiach is coming, so he's coming right now. And then it says, V'af al pi she'yismamea, even though he may tarry, he may tarry. I'll wait for him for every day that he comes. Wait a minute, you just said you have to believe he's coming. Now you're saying, wait a minute, I have this doubt. No, you just said it seems to contradict itself. Am I being clear enough about it? And the answer is, because it says anyone who tries to figure out when Mashiach is coming is causing delusions for himself. Mashiach will show up. Afterwards, we'll ask him the question. The famous Hasidic story, for example, that the Gemara tells us the Mashiach will not come on the eve of the Sabbath to upset the Sabbath preparations, or on Motzoi Shabbos, Saturday night. There was a great Rebbe, Bostoner Rebbe, who once said that in Milat Malka, Mashiach should come right now. So somebody said to him, Rebbe, the Gemara says that Mashiach will not come on Motzoi Shabbos. So he says, let him come and we'll ask him the question of how he got here. That's our attitude, basically. Yes, if he comes, I'll agree with every one of them who forecasted. I remember when I was studying here in 1963 in Israel, somebody published a little booklet as to why Mashiach was coming that year. It was not republished the next year. I believe Mashiach is coming. I hope, as we say in Shemona Esrei, may our eyes behold, you return to Zion, Barachamim. We add the word with mercy. With mercy. We don't want to see wars. And we don't want to see anything else. We want to see revelation. The world will accept Mashiach coming. So let me sing with you a nigun, then we'll bench. I assume there's enough people here to bench. I'll ask somebody to lead the benching, but I cannot. And have me in mind as well. On bagels, we have a question, you can make a moitzi on bagels, you have the right to do so. But my own family, bagels are made first by being boiled and then by being baked. On the boiling process, I have one of my disciples, it works actually for kashrus in Boston. When they boil the bagels, they boil them today in very hot water for about, he says, 1 or 2 seconds. It's just dipped in, and they take it out. Yeah. Years ago, they may have cooked it longer. I don't know. I always find them very tough. So maybe they don't cook them long enough. But if you cook it first, then you can't make a bracha. There's a question of whether this process is the way they're doing it today. So I have that problem. We'll sing this thing. It's from the end of Aleinu. V'yikablu chulo mizoyim ha'osecho v'sim lech aleim mehero v'oylam boed. Ki amalchu shel chohi. Familiar with the words? Or should we get Sidurim? L'olmei ad timlov. We need benches anyway. L'olmei ad timlov b'chovoi. V'yikablu chulo Malchusefon, Misim lo yechalei, Emei Oli Olam Lohen, V'yegamlu Chuzon, Misim Malchusefon, Misim lo yechalei, Emei Oli Olam Lohen. Oigi Yamal Evol Shelevai, Uli Yomeyad, Din Lo Yomechavai, Oigi Yamal Evol Shelevai, Uli Yomeyad, Din Lo Yomechavai, V'yegamlu Malchusefon, Misim lo yechalei, V'yegamlu Malchusefon, Misim lo yechalei, Oli Olam Lohen, Oigi Yamal Evol Shelevai, Uli Yomeyad, Dim Lo Yomechavai, Oigi Yamal Evol Shelevai, Uli Yomeyad, Dim Lo Yomechavai, Oishir Hamalei, Shuvat HaVoinoim, Shiva Zion, Reinu Kechavim, Ayom Amalei, Soy Binu, Oshaneinu, Rinau, Az Yoimru Lagoyim, Meidil Adoinoi, Lasoy Simelech, Igdil Adoinoi, Lasoy Simanu, Ayinu Simechim,
Right on the button. Right on the button.
Eshiviseinu, Ka'afigim Ba'anegev, Ha'azorim B'dima, V'emina Yikzoyru, Ayayele Olachoy, Ayayzei Leshem Azora, Ba'ayavoy B'dina, Noizei Should someone need a benching, please?
Malcolm? Let's go ahead, Malcolm.